Welcome, everyone. We are here at OSHEAN Cybersecurity Day. I am sitting now with Ellen Giblin. She's the founder of Privacy Hub, LLC. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Ellen, tell me, it's kind of like a talk show. Like, tell me about yourself, like an interview, right?
Sure.
So, again, you spoke briefly about your background, but how did you come to found the company, and tell me a little bit about how you got involved in cybersecurity?
Sure. So I started my career at Iron Mountain, and I worked I'm a lawyer and a risk manager, and I was one of the first privacy managers there at Iron Mountain. And basically what we were doing was responding to HIPAA and doing all the first business associate agreements that came in, and realizing that there were quite a few requirements that we would be needing to meet, and that we would need to implement new safeguards within the organization.
And so with Iron Mountain, you were storing people's data. I mean, kind of like in the cloud, but physically you were storing people's data.
Paper
Yeah.
was a big issue back then, and right around that time, a couple of years later, it was still a big issue, and that's when Mass 201 CMR 17 came out, which addressed both paper and electronic data.
Oh, interesting. And so that was a Massachusetts law.
Yes. So there's a mass security breach law.
Yep.
And then
It was one of the first security breach laws too, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. And so 201 CMR are the regulations that support the law, which set up the data security program.
Awesome.
That each company needs to have if they're processing personal information.
So you're an attorney. Like, what types do you take on cases today in terms of legal representation for privacy and risk?
That's a good question. So Privacy Hub is evolving. It started as my LinkedIn group, and I got in early to this. So, I have thousands of LinkedIn associates, and so I'm also certified by the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and so basically from those different groups, I brought together Privacy Hub and answered questions and just really pushed the conversation ahead to what's the next thing,
Right.
And, so it went from Gramm-Leach-Bliley, to HIPAA. All the state data breach laws started coming through. They started to have data security requirements. So, we started saying, hey, we need to pair up with our friends in information security. We need to work as teams.
So I have a question for you. When we talk about DNS, it seems the domain naming system never goes away in the context of security and or privacy. And so today, if I have an internet service provider, right, and they can see my DNS traffic, or I'm pointing to them to resolve the names, are they allowed to use that data? And how do they need to tell me? Do I need to agree to it? Because obviously that's a history of everywhere I'm visiting on the internet, down to what devices I have on my network. I mean, there's a lot of things you can glean off of that data.
So I think it's really, important to look at the privacy policy and the terms of use on anything that you're going to use on the internet. I mean, I think that it's something that people really don't do. It's something that lawyers struggle with, and they spend hours creating the perfect privacy policy, and then nobody reads it. And then now with the GDPR, we've all seen how important the privacy policies are.
Sure.
So, I think that, in each case you need to look and see.
Each ISP is likely going to have a different policy on that. There's no regulation that you know of that would impact that?
Not right at this point, right.
Some of the net neutrality, I want to say, was talked about in this similar kind of discussion, but I don't think it impacts that aspect of the privacy of your ISP, right?
No, I don't think so at this point.
GDPR was great for me in one respect, that I could go get my data now. And it actually had this impact where, privacy aside, if I can recover all of my data from a social media network, let's say, I can go somewhere else, right? Before, if I didn't have that, I might be stuck there because I can't get all my data and download it. But now I can, which is really nice. How has GDPR impacted your practice and your clients and various aspects?
So, for me, it's really been all about the privacy impact assessments. Looking at products and services and how they're being built, and taking into consideration the Internet of Things, and looking at the risks and how you're going to mitigate all of these new products and services that need to go to market. So I think it's a good practice now not to just look at, is this data going to be governed by GDPR, because we have the California laws coming into place.
Sure.
I think it's a good practice, and I actually used PIAs before GDPR.
Yep.
So because I have my government certification from the IAPP, and the U.S. government has used PIAs for quite a long time. So I really think that, getting all the risks, identified, and then all your mitigations, and then coming out with the residual risk that you can insure for at that point in the life cycle, then you really have control and an understanding.
Sure.
And I just want to talk about one more thing.
Sure.
I think that the GDPR was great because I had a project before the GDPR, and a regulator had asked for a data mapping exercise of an insurance company, and it was a very large insurance company. And I had a hard time finding a vendor. And
oh, interesting. Okay.
so now, of course,
You've got a wide selection
Yeah.
of vendors now. Yeah.
but I did find the right vendor at that point, and they've come quite a long way.
I find it interesting when regulation is imposed in really any fashion, that when, in this example of GDPR, it could make it more difficult for companies to bring products to market because they have to take into account these privacy regulations. But it also, on the flip side, it gave birth to an entirely new industry, or made another industry stronger, because now we have vendors. I feel like PCI did the same. And I'm looking at all this trends of regulation, and I'm like, it really is kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Stemming innovation is the negative side, potentially, but opening up new areas for business is the positive side.
It's very positive. I mean, PCI 201 CMR, the mass, data security regulations, basically mesh with PCI. So, yes, I think that's true. And again, I think that, one of the great things is the data mapping exercise. I think that's one of the best, cyber hygiene activities that you can undertake for a company to find out, where your data is, where it lives, who has control over it, what you don't need, and you can perm out.
I recommend to every single one of enterprises that we advise, or companies that we advise, is that's the basics. Before you go buy a bunch of products, right, you got to know where your data lives, who has access to it, and what it needs to transfer between is another good point as well, right? So those are all fundamentals, because if you're going to protect your data, you got to know where it lives, where it needs to go, and who has access.
And
right?
that brings me back to where we kind of started the conversation, which is paper.
Right.
Yeah,
you knew, right? And you could at least figure out more easily.
Right. I mean, in the beginning, with my colleagues at Iron Mountain, we knew someday digital was going to outweigh paper.
Sure.
But, in the end, a lot of times, we generate a ton more paper because we're printing things off,
Yes.
that we want from the internet. There's so much more information available. So, paper still is a high risk, and you still, need to make sure it's securely disposed of.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.